Good afternoon and welcome to this March 13th, 2019 work session and our final work session before we take a little break. And first item of business is the renter protections discussion. So I'll turn it over to manager, to staff.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Stephanie Jennings. I'm the Grants Manager in Community Development, and I'm here today to talk with you about renter protections. And so as part of this work session, these are the things that we will cover. I'm going to briefly talk about national and local trends related to local rental markets. Talk about the perspectives of renters gathered through a survey and focus groups recently conducted with the Housing Policy Board, then discuss recent actions related to renter protections, and then we will have time for to discuss areas of focus and potential next steps. So taking a step back and thinking about who rents and why and what are some of the national trends that we're seeing, there has been steady growth in the number of households that rent both locally and nationally. Nationally, 36% of households rent compared with 31% in 2005. Interestingly, it was actually higher in 1994, 36%. Generally, when you're looking at rental rates across the country, you tend to see higher rental rates in urban areas and much lower rental rates in suburban and rural communities. When you think about who rents, renting has increased across all age groups, households, and income types. And households headed by people aged 36 to 69 has driven a lot of the recent growth in renters. Looking at Eugene's rental market, 51% of Eugene households now rent. This is comparable to other cities with large student populations, but when you further look at the breakdown of that renter population, only 25% are under the age of 25. Another 25% are 25 to 35, and then the rest are over the age of 35. So it is actually quite a diverse group of people within the community. The median rents for all unit types across Eugene have increased, and vacancy rates do remain low. We have seen a steady increase in the number of rental units, and then we also have over 35 units of subsidized or regulated affordable housing units. Structure type, when you look at structure type for rental units in Eugene, actually most of them are in 2 or 1 unit structures rather than multifamily structures. And so this is typical when you're looking at less urban places. If you're looking at places like LA or Chicago, you'll see more of that in multifamily, but here we definitely have more in our single family stock and 2 unit stock. The issues that are faced by renters are fairly complicated, and so for the purposes of this discussion, I think it's useful, this diagram is helpful for thinking about the kinds of issues that renters face and understanding that they're often experiencing more than one issue. Or that issues will play off against one another. So for example, someone might only be able to afford a certain amount of for a unit, so they choose to live in a lower quality unit. And so that's just something you'll see again and again as we kind of go through this analysis. So the work, I'm going to talk a little bit about the work of the Housing Policy Board and the Renter Protections Task Team. So Housing Policy Board formed this task group in 2017, but the group really didn't start meeting until 2018 as they were previously focusing on some other activities. The group does include 12 members. It has a landlord representative, renters, student, and legal aid representation. One of the first things that this group wanted to do is to better understand the perspectives of renters. And so part of this was doing outreach. And so the task team developed an online survey tool It's important to note that this is not intended to be any kind of scientific survey. I would compare it to hearing the perspectives of 850 people through public forum. So they're really just telling their personal story, their perspective, and we're trying to kind of sum that up for you in 10 minutes or less. The other piece of this work was the listening sessions. So there were multiple listening sessions held, and I know Mayor Vinnis and Councilor Surratt were able to attend one of the listening sessions. And the listening sessions were open to others as well. So the neighborhood ones were not just limited to renters, so other people could participate. So as it says here, we did get 851 survey responses, and 98% of the respondents do live in Eugene. We did ask respondents to tell us what their occupation is, and so they could pick more than one of these, but we do see that most are employed full-time. Smaller portions of respondents are employed part-time or students or not currently working. We also asked respondents to describe their household, and so you can see that there is a diversity in the responses that we received. The first question that was really asked in the survey is, are you satisfied with your current rental home? And we received a response. 56% of the respondents said they were not, and 44% said that they were. We also asked respondents to describe their experience finding their current rental home. 71% said that it was competitive and stressful. 15% said it was quick and easy, and then other was the 14%, and a number of people responded that they had been in their rental home for a long time, so they couldn't really answer the question because it wasn't a recent experience. We did ask respondents to describe what their concerns were about their rental home. The cost of rent was one of the most significant issues. The other category I'll talk about in a moment, and that includes a number of different items. The home's condition was a significant issue as well. Size of the home and then location. When we look at challenges faced by renters as they have worked with their current or former property owners, many express concerns about rent increases, habitability, deposits, fees, and other types of issues. We also asked respondents if they had ever been asked or forced to leave a rental home, why, and so many identified rent increase as a cause, a no cause, lease termination, other eviction, or the home was foreclosed upon and they had to leave as a result of that. Of the 661 renters who indicated that they were not satisfied with their current housing, nearly 38% indicated the rental home's condition, habitability, and maintenance are substandard. Some renters indicated they're willing to live in substandard conditions because that's what they could afford. Others commented that they were fearful of asking the landlord to make repairs because they were concerned about receiving a rent increase, no cause lease termination, or eviction. We also asked a question if renters have experienced or perceive that they've experienced discrimination in their housing, and almost 30% of respondents felt that they had been discriminated against while searching or renting. And we asked them to tell us what they thought the basis was for the perceived discrimination. Legal source of income received the highest number of responses, followed by disability, familial status, and age. Additional topics identified in the survey and listening session, identified as barriers: rent, again, credit scores, income, application fees, deposits, a 5-year required rental history, criminal background checks, as well as physical disabilities. And then we also had an other comments section at the end, and many people took the opportunity to comment again about high rental rates, maintenance issues, asking for more supports for tenants, and then also just talking a little bit about how the rental housing market was impacting other aspects of their lives, and so their overall finances, mental health issues, and then what they were doing to try to address these issues, so such as considering moving outside of Eugene. And some talked about how the high cost of rent has kept them out of homeownership, and then others just described a feeling of being vulnerable and stuck, unable to stay in their current unit and not having enough money to move to a different unit. We did ask about their awareness of current resources, and it was good to see that many are aware of Eugene's rental housing code. Many of you know that there has been some work to really try to reach out and do more advertising for that program. Lane County Legal Aid, which is the primary provider of services related to tenant-landlord issues in our area. And then Fair Housing Council of Oregon, we contract with Fair Housing Council of Oregon for fair housing complaints. They run a hotline on behalf of the city, and we also work with them to do trainings throughout the year. And then Eugene's Human Rights Office and Community Alliance of Tenants. So just to recap the issues that we heard through this, and I will say, we just finished the last listening session in late February. We really tried to go through the survey as quickly as we could for today's work session, but we're still analyzing these results and the many comments that respondents made. When we look at availability, it's clear that many are competing for a limited stock of available units, and particularly at the lower end. And this is pretty consistent with national trends. So there's been a lot of research to show that nationally, the lower cost units the supply of those units is shrinking. Affordability, rents are continuing to increase for many. Folks also identified fees and deposits as a barrier. The quality of units, we saw many reports of substandard conditions and some fear for using existing tools such as the rental housing code because of concerns about stability. Access issues, again, 30% of respondents perceive that they experience discrimination in the housing process, and that there are some particular challenges with those with poor credit or criminal history or other sometimes physical barriers. And then lastly, stability. All of these factors lead to a lack of stability. And of course, there were concerns expressed about the no-cause eviction process as well. So I thought it would also be helpful to talk about recent related actions related to these different factors. So one of the biggest challenges is availability, and this really relates to our overall supply of housing. And of course, you all are deeply involved in the efforts, the housing tools and strategies, which you'll hear about later during this work session, and other efforts to increase housing production in our area. We have also been working to increase development of regulated affordable housing, and you're considering other actions that may support that. For affordability, the state recently took action through SB 608 to moderate rent increases, and then of course also increased development of regulated affordable housing also helps with affordability. For quality, there has been increased outreach to raise awareness of the rental housing code. For access, we have also increased fair housing outreach and training to inform both renters and landlords of their rights and responsibilities. And then lastly, related to stability, SB 608 does limit use of no-cause evictions, and so that is a big change to that process. So for next steps, we want to listen to you today and hear your concerns and desired areas of focus, work with the Housing Policy Board to further analyze survey results, and then identify potential options related to the identified focus areas for taking additional action. Okay.
Thank you very much. It's a very illuminating survey, even from the very beginning, even though you haven't completed, and I think the word vulnerability is sort of the key word that seems to describe a lot of pieces here. I have Mike and then Claire in the queue.
Thank you, Mayor. Two things that I would urge more focus on. Number one, and it's not discussed at all, and it's not measured in any of this. How many single adults live in a house, or I suppose how you constitute a family, as is listed here, and how many of those are multiple adults versus single adults. I'm less interested in how many kids live there than how many adults live alone or with children versus multiple adults. That often drives multiple incomes, and that for me is a key issue, is that we, especially in Eugene, and I've gone into the data before that show that from what we've been presented, but we live with single adults in one household more in Eugene than in other cities in Oregon. We seem to expect that that's the sort of housing that should be available, and I don't believe that the housing we have was built to that model. I think it was built for multiple adults, and I think that's an issue we should study and talk about a little bit more. Number two, the 31% of most cities that have of the people that rent versus our 51. It's not just the university, and I appreciate what you said there. It's a dramatic difference, in my opinion, and it's something we should look more into in terms of people's lifestyles and how we can address that more effectively. But I will say, too, in the last minute and a half here, that I spend all day long doing one thing, helping people buy a house and lending them the money to buy rental houses. And what we do at this table and the decisions we make absolutely make rental housing more expensive. Infill, for example, as one thing. If I work to loan somebody money to buy a rental home, they're going to become a landlord. One of the first things you're going to do is an appraisal. The appraiser looks at houses that have sold nearby recently. Even if it's a new house, there'll be a factor for the difference in age, but it's not as big a factor as you might think. And so a newer home, when we're infilling and selling all the time, that faster move in appreciation of value drives other houses that sell up in value faster. And when I loan somebody money to become a landlord and charge rent, one of the programs that we use has a formula. So somebody's mortgage payment, their principal, their interest, their taxes, and their insurance added up is X. And X has to equal 75% of what they're going to charge in rent in order to get the financing. So it's a little bit more than an extra 25% that has to be added on to the actual cost of purchasing and financing the house that you agree to charge and rent and hold aside just to be able to even become a landlord and buy it. So the more things we do to increase the cost of new housing being built, the more we're driving rents up. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire?
Thank you. Well, first, Stephanie, thanks for the presentation. And I wanted to appreciate the use of your word home to describe the rental homes that folks live in rather than unit when talking about where people who rent live. I recall attending a conference on urban planning with some city staff here, in fact, where an architect was speaking, had a slide of a single family structure labeled home and a multifamily structure labeled rental units. And I was really struck by the disparity in attitude towards those living in those different types of structures by framing it in that way. So I just want to call that out and acknowledge and thank you for that. You know, we've not ever really been able to get I think, a precise figure on what our vacancy rate is here. I think that's actually important. I moved here from a city in Southern California where the vacancy rate was 50%, and our landlord lowered the rent for us when we lost a landlord, roommate, rather than have us move out because he wasn't going to be able to rent his unit otherwise. And here we might have a 1% or 2% vacancy rate. So that puts a lot of pressure on folks who rent and really provides landlords with the advantage in terms of what they can charge, in terms of what the market will bear. So I have quite a little list of things, so I might need a second round, but things that I would like to see us explore, and some of those are informed by what you've provided, and some are informed by what I heard at the Whitaker Community Council meeting and other venues. I'd like us to see a way, look for a way we could address the need for people to put in multiple application fees and perhaps pay $25, $50, $75 for each one. There was conversation at the Whitaker meeting that there may be a smartphone app that might be available that we could connect with that would just have one application fee required. I would like the city to look at, and this is what I'm assuming we pass some kind of CET, this is one of the things I'd like us to explore using these funds for, is providing a revolving loan fund to provide first, last, and security deposit for those in need, strengthening protections to prevent retaliation, exploring the idea if we would have any authority to prohibit monthly rental fees for pets, as opposed to just a blanket security deposit to cover potential damage from pets. And requiring landlords to provide some kind of rights and responsibilities information, whether it's our rental housing code, to renters upon securing an agreement to rent. And just very quickly on the challenges that people found for people with disabilities, I wonder if we might be able to work closely with Lane Independent Living Alliance. That's one of the very things that they work on to help address that in a more strategic way. And then we also have social service programs that work with homeless folks to clear up their credit history. And so I wonder if we could connect our program with that work in a more deliberate way. So those are my thoughts and ideas right now. Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you. I really appreciate the presentation. I think this is really good stuff. One of the things that is very conscious for me is, and you mentioned this right at the beginning, this is a self-selected sample. So it's not a scientific survey, and that's, I think, a very important thing to keep reminding ourselves of. And when you have a self-selected sample, it's kind of like the restaurant reply cards. You only tend to get them from the people that are either very happy or very angry, so it tends to shade the result you get. So I'm less inclined to be really guided by pie charts and bars and graphs than I am with what people are actually saying. That's, I think, the real value of these kind of surveys is you get a chance to hear from people what's really motivating them, what's really driving them. And so from this standpoint, I think there's some really good stuff here with regard to why people are unhappy with their housing situation, what's driving them to feel the rental market is the way it is. And I think there's continued value there that we need to explore further. Some of their awareness questions I think were also very valuable. So I find it very informative, even if I don't feel it needs to direct us because it's not scientific. It is also very informative, and I think that there is a real value there. It also, I think, really at least confirms for me the notion that I don't think we can completely disengage from the housing market, either rental or single family building. I think to disengage is not going to fix the problem. I think we need to remain engaged and perhaps even engage more, but we need to do it in an appropriate way. And I think that's what really requires the study, because it's easy for government to get engaged in either rental or housing and do it in a way that is obstructive and doesn't help. And I think the Housing Tools and Strategies was an effort to try to say, what are those barriers that legitimately we should remove? And I still think there's a lot of conversation that needs to go on around that. But I think the other side is, yes, rents are high, housing costs are high, and I think if you disengage, it's not going to necessarily drive the cost down. And I realize there's some folks who believe it will, but I think it may have a relatively minimal effect, because there's a lot of factors in building a house. It's not just one or two. There's a lot of them. And we only have influence over a few in terms of barriers, but we actually can have influence significantly in terms of supports. And by support, I mean providing money, whether it's in the case of financing, equity funding, whatever, to be able to help these places get built. Because if somebody can build a rental unit and through the assistance of either supports, equity funding, or other kinds of ways to keep the cost down, then they can charge lower rents, or they can have a lower cost to get in. I also completely agree with everything Claire is saying about supports, how we can get people into rents more easily and how we can use our resources to do that. That's what the TAC report is talking about.
Alan?
Yeah, thanks. Great report, Stephanie. So why do we have 51% versus 36% nationally when only 25% of our renters are students? So that doesn't, being a college town doesn't make up the difference.
No, I would say it's, the point of comparison, when you look at the entire country, you're including all rural areas, all suburban areas, all urban areas. So I can pull data looking at other places that are similar in size, that are urban, similar to Eugene, and see what the differences are. But I would just say, when you're looking at the entire country, you're including a lot of very rural places in that comparison.
Yeah, that would be helpful to pull that kind of data and look at similar sized communities and college towns, because, yeah, you're right, that's an apples and orange comparison. In the info, you said we had 18,000 rental units?
That was based on the 2017 rental registration.
Okay, so then if it's 51%, then that means we have 36,000 housing units?
We have 64.
But I thought it was more like 65 when I look at other stuff. So if we're at 51% people renting, that doesn't seem to jive for me.
Yep. And part of this is you're looking at different sources of data. So some of this is federal data, census data. Some of this is through our city programs and registered units. And so, so in terms of kind of nailing down what are the discrepancies in those different numbers, that's something that we can look into.
Yeah, good, because I thought the number of housing units in the city was about 65,000. I talked in my work at UWeb and other stuff. And yeah, Mike's confirming that. So if one of the things that was startling in here, of 15% of the people who responded to the survey said that rent increases were so high they had to leave a previous rental, meaning they were displaced. Talk about instability that creates. 15% of 65,000, 15%, well, if there's 65,000, then there's 32,000 rental units. If it's 50-50, 15% of that is like 4,800 people. If it's 18,000, it's like 2,700 people a year are being displaced in our city. Whatever that number is, even if it's 2,000, that is really high. And so that's something to take into consideration in all the stuff that we're moving forward on this affordable housing stuff, because the interface between the affordable housing tools and strategies and stability in housing and availability and access to it and all these different things are really linked together. And that's one of the things that isn't done well yet, and one of the things I hope to talk to in the next work session. I'm glad we did SB 608, no-cause evictions and rent control less than 7%, because I've gotten numerous complaints about people getting 25% increases and having to move related to that. Some of the things Claire were talking about and that I also agree with, the high cost of rental applications, usually not refundable, having a consolidated process. There is an app, it's called One App Oregon, Portland area uses it, where you can have one application that can be accessed by anybody in the rental housing market. So given that that's usually not refundable, if you do 5 of them and they're all $50, that's $250. So another thing is the uncertainty about returned security deposits. We don't have a standardized policy at all within the city. It's all over the map. There's no limits. There's no caps on these things. How that happens, we don't have a resolution process. That could be part of our rental housing code that we might want to look at. And I will need a second round because I have a couple other ideas too.
Yeah, Emily, go for it.
I appreciate the presentation and the comments from my colleagues. I also agree that the multiple application fees are nuts, and I'd like to protect against landlord retaliation, the dog security and rent difficulties, helping the credit history, and the security deposit rules that Alan brought up. I don't have anything special to add to that list, but I just wanted to say that I want those things too. Thank you, Claire.
Okay, I have 3 counselors for the second round, but I just want to ask a question or two. So one is the question of month-to-month rentals. I don't know if people commented on that. It's one of the things I wonder about, the no-cause eviction restrictions, if that will then precipitate more landlords putting tenants on month-to-month rentals, which just creates that monthly uncertainty for tenants. So do you have any insights from that, from the listening sessions, or I don't know that you asked a question about month-to-month.
We did not specifically ask a question about month-to-month rentals. There were a lot of different comments. I mean, and some of them, I think a lot of times tenants don't even know if they have a month-to-month rental or a longer-term lease. And so, you know, I would say in general, I think there was just also to people accessing information and understanding their rental housing situation. But, you know, in terms of understanding what the impacts would be of changes in SB 608, it's really too early to know. And we didn't really hear any conjecture about that in the comments.
That just feels to me like one of the things we might want to watch is that impact on month-to-month. And the other thing, and this will come into our conversation with the housing tools and strategies, one of the options in housing tools and strategies has to do with housing navigators, and that's something familiar with the providers. The housing providers often are helping people with in homelessness prevention programs navigate, and whether that's a piece related to the application fee and also related to simply reducing the tension and the competitiveness and navigator, especially with their credit issues, disability issues. Some of those pieces might be an important public service that we would think about, how we would advocate. All right, Mike, and then Claire, and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. I noticed there in one portion that between duplexes and single-family homes that are rentals, we hit 75%. When you combine those two numbers, and multifamily then being 25 or 6 or whatever the number was there. Interesting to me were the areas that you did the surveys, because there were a couple left out. North Eugene and River Road and Santa Clara were left out of that survey, of the areas listed here that you have on, I forget which page it was.
Are you asking about the places where the listening sessions were
Correct.
conducted?
Correct?
Yes, it was not, they did
Let me
not,
get to
they
the
weren't
larger,
able
which
to
is
get
that.
to every neighborhood for the listening sessions. The survey was available throughout the entire city.
Right. We had, when we did the urban growth boundary, one of the earliest pieces of work we did told us that we have 61%, 62%, and I don't agree with these numbers based on what I know, but that we have 62% single-family homes and 38% multifamily homes in Eugene. But this said that 75% of the rental units, at least in those areas surveyed, were in single-family homes or duplexes, and only 25% were multifamily homes. So, my question is, can we get a better sense of what's constructed and what's rented and what's not? Because it seems to me like, depending on the kind of conversation we have, those numbers get pretty wide in our community in terms of the disparity of what type of housing, can we get an absolute definitive, there are X number of renters in Eugene, they are in these type of houses, they are, so that we can have better conversations about tools? That's a part of the study that you're asking about. That would be very helpful to me to have better data about that. And the other piece would be this. We're talking, and I feel a little bit like Alan, I suppose, does when we start talking about large-scale energy conservation. But to be in this industry, but we're only talking about one side of the renters market, the side where we help those who are in real distress. because we have a tight rental market. I would suggest that there's other work we could be doing that would help as well, and that is to make more renters owners. Now, Springfield does, I think, more work in this way than we do. And I can tell you for absolute certainty that there has never been an easier time in the last 12 years since the housing crisis for someone to purchase a home than today. It's never been easier since the housing crisis started. And Springfield has programs to help people with one of the big hurdles, which is the down payment, in a revolving loan fund that they do to help people get out of being a renter and being an owner. It obviously lowers what they're paying per month to be an owner versus a renter, and then it becomes stable and doesn't go up. So they live better, number one. Number two, we're making more rentals available at that point, and I think that's work we should be focused on as well.
I did just want to clarify in the presentation, so the graph that shows Eugene rental units by structure type, that is data from the Eugene rental code and required registration. So it's not related to the survey in any way. It's a different source, and that's just simply those that have registered and what kinds of units those rental homes are located in. And then, in terms of the down payment assistance program, there's definitely tools for helping people to move through the housing continuum. And I think that some of the questions that I would ask is, at what scale do we want to try to do things like that? Because there's a number of people, and some of the program that we had in the past utilized federal funds, which was only up to 80% of area median income. The challenge that we had is that as the housing prices go up, the $10,000 of down payment assistance was not enough to help people get into homeownership. Also, with rising incomes, a lot of people were actually just above the 80% limitation, so we were no longer able to use the federal funds to help those individuals. Springfield has actually experienced some similar issues. Their market is not quite as hot as ours, and so they still have been able to do a few. But that was a challenge with the program that we had in the past. But I think we might be able to look at options in the future. But again, as kind of the scale of how many folks would like to help through that type of program.
Here, I'm out of time, but that was a direct contradiction to what I was saying, and I would really like to follow up on that because it's not part of what she just got done saying. Counter to what I said isn't entirely true, and I'd like that chance to address it, please.
Yes, let me let Alan go, and then you can have another round.
I don't want to hear that, but yeah, the other statistic that was in the AIS that wasn't in presentation was the amount of rent burdened folks in Eugene, which was 58% of renters are paying more than 30% of their income on housing, and astonishing 36% pay 50% or more just on housing. So that's the crisis we're talking about. That's just an enormous amount of money. Related to the uncertainty around security deposits and maybe creating a resolution process within our rental housing code is also the pet fees of other folks have mentioned and what policy we have around that. And then also just more education. We had pretty good, I think the people engaged in this survey actually were pretty engaged. So it's probably not correct to say that 75% of the renters know about the Eugene Rental Code program. We're doing great work there. We just need to do a whole lot more in getting out that word and about the fair housing rules and the other things. And, potentially that could be as an attachment to your, to all rental agreements. I mean, geez, we do one for lead-based paint disclosures. We could do it for rental housing code in Eugene. And then I like the idea of using some of the CET 1% CET money for establishing some first and last month loans or security deposit or application fee, with some criteria around who gets it and how we distribute it. And also around the down payment, I'm curious what Mike has to say about that. using that money to help people get into houses, not just stability or getting into rentals, but also getting into lower income houses. I guess the final question I had was related to the group that's working right now, and they're just finishing off their listening sessions, or just did finish off the listening sessions. So what's their next step, and what's their timeline, and what's their end product going to look like?
So at this point, they have not discussed next steps. I mean, I think they really wanted to hear from council and hear what you all are interested in. And then, and I wanted to hear that feedback as well, and then work with them as well as the city manager and think about what are the most appropriate next steps.
Great. I have a couple of suggestions. So one of the things that was missing for me in the affordable housing tool strategy work done so far, and this complements it very well, is the renter's perspective in that process. And so having gone through all this stuff, gone through the survey, gone through the listening sessions, I think these folks that are on this group are really poised to then create things that Claire and I and Emily were talking about in terms of things that we can do to stabilize housing and get better access and increase the affordability and availability of the housing. So if they could focus in on types of actions that the city can take to add to our list, our inventory, that would increase the affordability housing supply, but also increase the stability and access and affordability, that would be really good. So in the same vein as this, so that we can integrate that stuff into the stuff that we're doing with the affordable housing so that they complement each other, which is actually why I asked to have this session first and then the affordable housing session after this, because I think this stuff is really important to integrate into that before we finalize it. And so if they could come up with stuff, but that means they have to work fairly fast to do that, because we're poised to move forward on this. Like Friday? Could they do it by Friday? Might be hard. Any Friday would be good.
And so part of this is when you think about this area, I mean, there are actions that are regulatory. This is an area where there are some limitations on local jurisdictions, and some of this work really has to take place at the state level, especially in the areas of tenant-landlord law. There are things around rental housing code, for example, clearly within the local sphere. And then, as Councilor Pryor mentioned, and Councilor Surratt, a lot of supports, so you can do education supports, rental assistance, deposit assistance, and then also, of course, actions to expand the supply, because a lot of these things are happening as people are competing for the limited stock of available units. So having housing navigators can definitely help, but you're still competing for that limited number of units. And so I do feel like, yes, they do go very well together. And so I can definitely work with Housing Policy Board, and we can come back with different types of tools. And we can try to ask some of the data questions that have also been raised.
Good. Yeah, just being as specific as possible, like city facilitate a consolidated rental application process or app, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, to do this work, in addition to all the other things that are happening right now, we may need to get some consulting assistance or do some other things to actually be able to kind of think about best practices, to think about some of the data questions that we know council would like answers to.
Okay, I'm gonna give Jennifer her first chance, and then Mike gets to circle back, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I found this very informative. If we're going to send this back for folks to work on, I kind of see that a lot of these issues kind of fall into two categories. And one category is things that really need to be worked on and are probably going to take a long time and a lot of work. And then another category, which are completely unacceptable situations. It's completely unacceptable that someone is living somewhere that is not habitable. If people are concerned that their landlords are just completely not doing their jobs, that is not acceptable. And those types of issues, it would be really nice to know, and I wish I was more informed myself. Are there things we can do in those categories right away to help make sure people are in safe situations where they're being treated, they're not being, discriminating against renters. That's just not, those things are not acceptable. And so if they could come back with things that we can work on in those categories, and then the other things that, that I really like the ideas. I'm so glad some of my colleagues are much more informed than I am, because these are fantastic ideas. I have many friends who are paying more for rent than I pay for my mortgage, and that's completely ridiculous, because they fall into a category of they wish they were not renting, they wish they were owning, they clearly have the money to pay for the mortgage. Those barriers, whatever, they're probably different for different people, that are keeping them out of buying those homes that Mike would love to sell them. What can we do to get them into that better situation and have that more stable? And it sounds like a lot of people at this table that are a little more informed than me have great ideas, and if we can take all those ideas and then figure out how they're feasible, how can we get to them? That would be great. And I really want to tell the people that are in these committees that are working, thank you so much for all the hard work they're doing on this.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. You said it better than I did. And the point is, everybody's paying somebody's mortgage, either their own or somebody else's, and then some. Fact. And the thing I'm saying is, and I'm going to put it really simply, we have too many renters. We have way too many renters. We have a much higher percentage than other cities do. We have, as Claire mentioned, 1-2%, whatever their vacancy rate is, it's incredibly low because we don't have enough stock for the number of people who want or are renters. My point is, let's help the ones that are having trouble at the bottom end too, but let's get rid of some of the renters and open up the market a little bit more than we are doing. And as far as the down payment assistance programs, NEDCO's program, and then Springfield has a program with a pot of money that they use on a rotating basis for down payment assistance. With both of those programs, yes, there's been issues around area median income and cost of housing that affect how many people can use those. But by far the biggest problem is the pots of money run out. There's plenty of people who qualify and want access to them, but the money runs out first. My point is, we ought to be investing more money in a revolving fund to help people with down payment assistance, because that's by far the biggest problem, is that there isn't an accessible opportunity to have that down payment. And that's frankly one of the biggest problems. Either it's credit or it's lack of down payment that keep people from leaving being renters and becoming homeowners. But MIT did a study about 5 years ago, and the single fastest method to equalize income inequality and wealth inequality is home ownership. It's not even a close call. So the more we're doing to help people buy homes gives room and breathing room to the rental market, and at the same time deals with helping people out of poverty. So I actually think that should be one of our bigger goals. We already know we have too many renters compared to other cities. So that's something I'd like to see us study and say, what are the best ways? I happen to think, in my experiences, that it's down payment assistance, but there's got to be others. And that's, I hope, will be part of this work too.
Thank you all, and thank you. I think very, very informative discussion, and we'll look forward to the next chapter. So thank you, everyone, for that. And this segues smoothly into our next topic, the housing tools and strategies.
I'm not so sure everyone's on board.
You're ready.
Good afternoon. Ann Fifield, Community Development, and I'm here to give you an update on the Housing Tools and Strategies project. Here with Mike Kinnison, Community Development Director, and then Terry Harding from the Planning Division. So the Housing Tools and Strategies project is an effort to tie together the different city projects and initiatives that affect housing affordability, and to identify tools and strategies to impact housing affordability, availability, and diversity. This project came about because Eugene has a lack of housing that's affordable to a wide variety of households. It's a problem particularly acute for very low-income households, but even middle-income households, as you just discussed, have difficulty finding housing in their price range. The project has included stakeholder outreach as well as technical analysis, and we provided a summary of that work in December. Today, we're here to update you on our work in progress and discuss the next steps. We're not asking for specific action from council at this time. So in the technical analysis that supported the project, we looked at the underlying reasons behind the lack of affordability in Eugene. We looked at the things that impact the cost of constructing new housing, the financial feasibility of different housing types, and we also looked at the demand for housing. The technical analysis for this project showed that from 2000 to 2016, Eugene's population grew by 17%, and new housing units increased by 15%. Of course, we don't need one housing unit for every person. A family of 4 people only need one housing unit, but our average household size is 2.3 individuals per household, and so when you do the math, demand for new housing units, the population increase makes the demand increased by just over 10,000 units, and the supply of housing units increased by just over 9,000 units. Demand exceeded supply by 1,100 units, and when demand exceeds supply, prices increase. These numbers don't include the households who would like to be in Eugene but can't find an affordable rental or house to buy. So they end up in Springfield or Junction City or Veneta and other outlying communities. Those individuals have higher commute costs and they increase the whole region's carbon footprint as well. This has created conditions in the housing market that are similar to musical chairs. In musical chairs, the unlucky person who wasn't able to quickly claim a chair when the music stopped is out of the game. To win, you have to be fast. It's similar in housing, except there's no music, and the chairs are housing units. To win, you need financial resources. Households join this game when a new household forms, which happens when a family moves to Eugene, or a couple gets divorced, or kids move out of the house and form their own household. Those new households join this game of housing musical chairs. In musical chairs, there's fewer chairs than people. In housing musical chairs, there's fewer housing units than people. More affluent households can buy or rent something, and middle-income households can buy or rent something, but the prices they all have to pay have gone up. The households with the fewest financial resources have been squeezed out of the market. They don't get a chair. So how do we solve this problem? One part of the solution is to increase supply. When a new house is built, it's as if an additional chair was brought to the game. Even increasing the number of high-end homes can help address the problem because the most affluent households will have a bigger pool of houses to choose from, and they won't bid up the prices of more modest housing. But building only new high-end homes won't solve the problem. If a lot of big houses were built, so much so that the prices dropped and middle-income households could afford to buy them, they're still expensive houses to maintain. They have bigger roofs that need repairing, they have more pipes that could burst in a freeze, and there's more exterior to paint. So to solve the problem, not only do we need to increase the number of housing units, but we need to increase the types of housing units. In the long term, it makes sense to encourage the production of moderate-sized units so households with moderate incomes can afford to maintain them. Increasing the supply of moderate homes will have a bigger impact and will provide housing that's affordable to purchase and maintain in the long term. If small, lower-cost units can be built, lower-income households are more likely to find a chair. The key to solving our housing affordability problems is to increase the number of housing units and the diversity of housing types so that more households at a wider variety of income levels will be able to find an available home that is affordable. So last fall, the Housing Tools and Strategies Working Group identified over 80 potential actions that could be implemented to increase that affordability, availability, and diversity of housing in Eugene. The different actions fell into 4 broad categories, listed up here on the slide. I won't read them. You've seen them before. We've assembled all of these actions into the Housing Tools and Strategies Action Inventory, and this is attachment A in your packet today. It's divided into 3 sections: in progress, recommended, and not recommended, and each of those sections has those 4 broad categories in it. The action inventory includes items that came forward from the Housing Tools and Strategies Working Group or from Better Housing Together. It's a working document. We expect it will change on a regular basis. New ideas will emerge, and they'll get added to the inventory. In-progress actions will be completed and come off the inventory, and recommended actions will move to in-progress. It's not a formal policy document, but more of a parking lot for potential actions. It's a tool to keep staff focused on priorities and to communicate progress to the community. The Housing Tools and Strategies website now shows the same information that's in the inventory, so it's easily accessed by anyone who's interested. Today, I'll review the first two sections, but not that third section of not recommended actions. The not recommended is in the action inventory just as a way to acknowledge that those potential actions emerged from the Housing Tools and Strategies Working Group, but they either had very little support or weren't technically feasible. So the action inventory shows that staff are working on a big list of items. We included a list of them in your agenda item summary, and they're described in more detail in the action inventory, and we want to highlight a few of the items. Under land use code barriers, staff in the planning division are working with a contractor to complete an audit of the land use code to identify barriers to accessory dwelling units and missing middle housing types. The audit is funded by a grant from the state's Department of Land Conservation and Development. The work is expected to be completed by this spring, and the results will be presented to Planning Commission. The technical research conducted for the Housing Tools and Strategies project has made it clear that the land use code is a fundamental tool to guide what types of housing are allowed. To achieve the goals of increasing the availability and diversity of housing, Council will need to consider making changes to the code to remove the barriers identified in the audit. Under reduce the cost and time burden category, many of the items that were identified as administrative in nature, that when we spoke to you in December, those are included in that category. They looked like low-hanging fruit that were relatively simple. We've learned, of course, that nothing is simple. Some of the items are really technical details, such as the stormwater treatment and erosion control regulations. Our team has worked with Better Housing Together so we can better understand what are the builders' concerns on those issues. And then we've also spoken with staff in building and permit services and public works to those folks who implement the regulations and know the details of our processes and the city's role in that regulatory process. We've worked to peel back and understand the layers, and we have not found any quick fixes. The regulations are in place to protect water quality. The regulations require stormwater runoff be filtered before it leaves the site. On small infill sites, it can be very expensive because it's a small site with a lot of infrastructure. But protecting our groundwater and our water quality creates costs for small housing production. There's not an obvious way to lower the construction costs and protect groundwater at the same time. All of these regulations are complex. And to help facilitate the navigation of them, the Planning and Development Department is creating a staff position to act as a liaison between builders and regulatory staff. This person will help builders navigate the system and help improve the communication between the builders and the regulators. The position has been described, we have a position description and it's getting ready to be posted very soon. Under the category increase the inventory of and access to affordable units, the focus of this category has been on the construction excise tax, or CET. You all voted to move it forward and you'll have the opportunity to vote on it in April. The ordinance as drafted creates a funding source with the CET, and it also shifts funds from the general fund to an affordable housing fund. The final category is additional options, which is a catch-all for things that didn't fit neatly in the first three categories. And one of these items focused on renter protections, and you just had a work session on that. Another item was to create a housing action plan, and that's what the Housing Tools and Strategies Action Inventory aims to be. It aims to be a repository of all the different actions and initiatives that affect housing. All of these in-progress projects and initiatives are listed in the action inventory. And so the inventory also lists recommended actions. And there are a wide variety of recommended actions in the first strategic category, remove barriers in the land use code. In our work on this project, it became clear to staff that some key tasks should be completed first to lay the foundation for the many other actions that will remove barriers. One of the ideas that emerged from the working group was to align the zoning map with the comprehensive plan. To accomplish this task, there's multiple subtasks, and the first two are complete and adopt the housing chapter of the comprehensive plan, and complete and adopt the comprehensive plan map with parcel-specific data. And I'm going to have Terry Harding walk you through how this works, because she understands the details much better than I do.
Thank you, Anne. Is my mic on? Yeah? Okay. Okay, this chart is attached to your packet, and I want to spend a few minutes walking you through it because we've tried to summarize kind of how we get from here to there in one graphic. So the pictures across the top show how the idea of a home becomes a real place you can live in. At the citywide scale, we start with our vision, Envision Eugene, which contains a pillar that states, provide housing affordable to all income levels within the community. That's really our vision, and then the question is, what do we do to get there? On the top line of this graphic, I've shown you the consolidated plan in the policy column, and that really focuses on our federal resources and assisting lower income households. Sorry, I lost my place, just a moment. The policy documents in this column set the foundation, hence the picture of the foundation, for our work on housing projects that assist lower income households. Then in the project column, you can see the construction excise tax that Anne talked about under consideration, and then finally in future projects, programs and projects that could be funded by the CET. The rest of the diagram is about not specifically affordable housing, it's about all housing. And the first line in the column shows the adoption of the urban growth boundary. We finished that, checked it off in 2017. We also wrote and adopted several chapters of a new Envision Eugene comprehensive plan, but not the chapter on housing or the parcel-specific diagram. And I have a couple slides on those in a moment. But meanwhile, after adopting that urban growth boundary, we did launch a number of projects to begin implementing Envision Eugene, including, I've shown here, the River Road neighborhood planning effort and corridor study, clear and objective housing criteria, the code audit, work on accessory dwelling units, as well as tracking several state bills that you've all discussed that would impact our local work on housing. All of these on this diagram relate to ideas that came up through the Housing Tools and Strategies Working Group. And finishing them will enable the city, as Anne said, to take additional actions, such as those shown in the far right column, comp plan updates, zoning updates, and code updates. For a little more information on the comprehensive plan, you may recall that every city in Oregon has both a UGB and a comprehensive plan which implements all 19 of our statewide planning goals. In Eugene, we started out with a regional comprehensive plan, the Metro Plan, which covered both Eugene and Springfield and included a regional urban growth boundary, a regional land use diagram, and regional policies. In 2012, Eugene City Council approved a new vision called Envision Eugene, and then in 2017, we adopted the new urban growth boundary for our city and some of our policy chapters, like the new TSP, Transportation System Plan, and a chapter on economic development. But we didn't finish. This is the table of contents for the comprehensive plan. And the chapters in bold black type were adopted, and those in gray remain left to finish. Continuing our work on this housing chapter will enable us to establish agreement on our policy priorities, such as things that came up through housing tools, increasing housing density along corridors, or enabling more missing middle types in more places. These are really foundational conversations that guide future items like code amendments and require agreement at this table by our policymakers. We aim to bring a draft housing chapter to you this fall after working through our boards and commissions, the Planning Commission, and Community Review. To show you what we're dealing with right now, you might have seen the Metro Plan diagram. A new parcel-specific land use diagram will help us be on a path to more efficiently utilize our buildable land inventory for its planned use. Right now, we don't have a parcel-specific map. We have this map, which notes in the corner that it's valid at 11 by 17 only. So don't rely on what you see on the screen. It's not valid. Decisions are actually made on a case-by-case basis, which is time-consuming and costly and delays the production of housing. The new diagram will provide clarity and transparency for property owners, neighbors, developers, and staff. Ultimately, we will translate our Envision Eugene vision map, that's the map on the left that we generated in 2012 and was approved by council, into a parcel-specific land use diagram, that's the blank square in the middle, which can then be updated over time to implement the vision and your adopted policies, such as designating high-density housing along the corridors. The land use diagram is then further implemented by zoning and the land use code, and the parcel diagram work will be ready for council review in 2020. So these have been on our work plan for quite a while. We're really excited that a lot of things are dovetailing and allowing us to make progress in overlapping areas. This is your slide.
Sure. I just wanted to close by acknowledging a term that we learned when we first came back to report out on our housing tools and strategies process, and that was the wicked nature of this problem. And I think that if there's anything that we've learned, and Ann said it well, is that what we're finding is what might seem straightforward and simple solutions aren't necessarily, and that applies to even those that we've referred as administrative in nature, and that sounds easy, but as we're digging in, we're finding that there's often a foundational, rational reason for the policies that we have or the fees that we have in place. So, and as we're working through that, we're trying to balance our responsibilities for fiscal sustainability and the general welfare of the community. But that's not to say that we're not going to look at all of those issues and suggestions with intention. And that's exactly what we're doing, and we're doing it with a problem-solving mindset. So there may be instances that we're just not able, or we conclude that we're not able to do things that were recommended through the housing tools and strategies process. But we will be clear about why that is, and we'll also consider what was the intended outcome, and is there something else that actually would get us there? And so that's kind of how we're going to be approaching that work. I also want to point out that the wicked nature of the problem implies that there are few easy choices of significance, and that it's not just based in technical analysis, that housing in our community is a value-laden topic, and so and us trying to solve the issues around affordability and availability and diversity of type, we're going to have to struggle with those community values, and there will be conflicting values, and we have to be bold and think about how we'll make those choices. And I know you're all too familiar with how housing-related issues involve dealing with conflicting values in the community. So I just want to say that we believe the most impactful actions in the inventory will involve council action on changes to the land use code, and those will require tough, bold choices and balancing of values, and we will do our best to provide you the information you need to support those decisions. And we're committed to honoring the agreements we made with community stakeholders in the housing tools and strategies process by continuing to work through the inventory. We intend to be transparent about the work, maintain clear communication on progress to you and stakeholders. We'll be providing council quarterly updates on our progress, whether at this table or via your packets or email. And as we work through the existing load of work in progress and create staff capacity, we'll continue focusing on items in the inventory that require code changes and to implement and bring those back to this table for council consideration and direction. So with that, we look forward to hearing from you and answering whatever questions.
Thank you very much. And I thought that was an incredibly crisp presentation of the whole context of a lot of work. And I also just wanted to say that I think the basic spreadsheet that you've provided us, this matrix, is very clear and understandable and incredibly helpful, and sort of amazing when you look at the number of things where you say, yes, it could have an impact. It's a long list of things that potentially could have an impact, so very interesting to see. I have Mike in the queue, and then Chris, and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate all of your hard work. I appreciate the presentation, especially the part, Michael, where you talked about the data, because I think that's important. I think the work you're doing to help, how we frame all of this helps us make better decisions, and I appreciate your hard work kind of helping see it. The lot-specific stuff, I can't wait for. I'm very excited about that, Terry. Well, but there's also, I think, I think it's useful for us to look at this differently. I'm going to keep hammering a similar issue yet again as it fits in here. And Terry, you said, because I think there's a logic flaw in something council did and adopted. And it's this. Terry, you said that the Envision Eugene pillar vision to provide housing to all income levels. That's exactly what it says. And you said that households have trouble finding housing in their price range, and thus, and this was the jump, the key, you didn't talk about why, but said that means we should provide more housing type because households have trouble affording what's available. And we've got a commitment to provide what's available. Okay, that makes sense. But here's what we've never talked about. You used the word households throughout, but there's no definition of what households is. And here's my question. Has households changed over time? Because if it has, we're not talking about that. And I believe it has. I believe that the basic layout of Eugene's housing is designed for a different type of household than what's dominant now. And I think in the same way, I think most people in Eugene, that's a generalization, but most people in Eugene want to be able to drive their single automobile where they need to go. I think the council recognizes that that presents some challenges, and so we do some things to prepare, to provide other options and to incentivize different behaviors, because we know that that produces some results that maybe everybody doesn't want, even though they want to be able to do that. Then so the question is, because everybody wants to be able to have a household the way they want to construct their household, they want to have a home the way they construct their household, is that always the best way to do it? Is that always the thing that we ought to do, is just automatically provide that instead of having a broader community conversation about, do we construct households here and define them differently than other communities do? I think we do. And you can see that clearly between Eugene and Salem in number of households and number of people, because it's like a 20% difference in homes versus the exact same number of people. I'm out of time and I want to talk a little more, so I'll take another.
All right, great. Chris?
Thank you. Thinking back to was it June or July that we embarked on this housing tools and strategies process, because in conversations with a lot of folks, it was clear that there were, at least there was the feeling there were significant barriers to trying to build more affordable housing. And so on the barrier side, the cost side, could we come up with a set of strategies to quickly and easily begin to remove those barriers and reduce the cost side of building homes? And we allocated additional money to go into more detail in order to do this, to try to come up with an initial list, but also to look at this in a more deep dive way. And I'm really pleased with the progress so far. But the question I want to get at is, as we sit here now in this meeting, you said, yeah, we came up with a dozen administrative ones, and that was great. I mean, at least I felt we at least made that effort at that time to come up with some stuff, but it's relatively small. And what I'm hearing is, yeah, this is wicked complicated, and we can't come up with a quick fix of, here's 5 things you can do, it'll reduce the cost of building a home by $100,000, let's go home. No pun intended. That it's more difficult than that. And I get that. What I'm trying to say is, and one of the complaints I've heard from people in the building industry is, you know, we've talked about how complicated this is before, and that's just an excuse for not doing anything. Oh, this is a big problem. Gee, it's really complicated, so we'll just shine it on for another decade. And what I want to be able to say and believe is that the work you're proposing to do here is going to continue to be authentic and sincere and intentional to actually do this work and actually reduce barriers. So when you say it's wicked, it's going to take some additional time, it's going to result in some additional effort, there is still an intentional goal in mind to do what was asked back in June and July of last year. Let's find ways to reduce the barriers. And I know that's not going to be the only part of the solution. There'll be other parts that are needed. But I want the city of Eugene to be able to say with all honesty that we're not just going to say, oh, this is complicated and we need to drag this out for another 10 years. That unlike in the past, we're really going to work at it. We're really going to take the time and the effort and the expense necessary to find ways to make housing more affordable, at least to the degree the city can, so that more people can get into homes. And that's really what the question is. And I know that's a tough question for you to try to answer, but how can you reassure me that this is an authentic, sincere, and intentional effort to actually do this?
You're looking at me, Chris. That's a great question, and I was actually, I was trying to answer that in the words that I was saying. And so by acknowledging that this is difficult and that there aren't easy solutions, and what I'm trying to do is not be disingenuous. And we don't say that we are intentionally not saying that committing to implementing everything, because we haven't had time to dig into everything. And so we're trying to be fair and clear and realistic about this. But you're right, we fully intend, I mean, I specifically chose the word intention in my words because that is how we're approaching it. And so we are systematically working through internally each of those suggestions that are administrative in nature that were identified through the process. And we're having hard conversations internally about what we can do. We haven't reached any conclusions yet on anything, so we're just starting that work. I don't know what I can tell you other than to give you my word that we're doing that work. But I guess I would say the proof will be in us coming back and meeting our commitment that we're making today, that we're going to be communicating with you, and we'll be clarifying what it was that we've been able to do or not been able to do and why, and doing the same thing with our stakeholders. And I would also say that while we think that really kind of the bold moves are around the land use code, and those are going to be the hardest decisions and have potentially the biggest impact, we acknowledge that any kinds of cost reductions for the building community are not insignificant to them, and that when we initiated this process and got council direction, we were directed to look at that, and that's we intend to look at that too. So that's.
Chris, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think part of it is sort of what we've done already, and what's in the queue, I think, is a demonstration of intent and wanting to, and a commitment to doing. So, for example, clear and objective standards is one of those where we may not all agree on what the outcome of that is, but the work is moving forward, and we'll bring that back, and you can land that. I think the urban reserves is a conversation that's underway, and so we're doing that. There's any numbers of things that are in progress that have resulted from the conversations last summer that are already in progress. The CET, you'll have a chance to take some action on that in April, whatever you choose to do with that, and then there's some subsequent action that comes out of that. And so I think the best assurance that I can give you is the work that's already being done is being done, and that there is progress in that work. And so all this other will have to follow that. The other piece of that is we also are as concerned as you are about affordability of housing in this community. And so we also have a high intention and a high motivation to ensure that people have the ability to be in whatever homes that they choose to be in. And so that's part of our intent as well. And so we have that same commitment. So I think part of it is already work that's being done, an intentionality of how to structure the work into the future will also be a part of that.
I don't belabor answering you, but the comprehensive plan, policy, and diagram work is a non-trivial way to reduce costs. If you want to build something that is zoned in a way that does not match with the comprehensive plan, it's a long, uncertain, and costly process to make that happen, and it happens all the time. It takes builders time, and it takes a lot of staff time. We take care of that. We've eliminated a bunch of work, and it's very policy focused, but it will have a non-trivial impact on the cost of producing housing.
Great, thank you.
Alan?
Thanks for all this work. This is a much better format for, and the thinking that's gone into this. I notice as we put more horsepower into this and the more we think about it, the better and better our products get and the more honed they get. And I'm really encouraged by the in-progress actions that show all the things that we are already doing that are underway. And I think that's probably understated, actually, how much we're actually already doing. But after working on this for a while, what's clear to me is that the depth of this problem is startling, and that the really long duration of time that it's taken to create this problem, it's baked for decades, is really informative. And the data and the stories really show that it's very clearly a crisis and needs immediate action, but stubborn, complex problems like this one take time to fix. And that's not to say we don't need to do immediate actions. We do need to do immediate actions that will help, and we need to do that quickly. That's why the original thing I was talking about was 5 or 6 things that we can move the needle on affordable housing supply, and this turned into a bigger, more comprehensive thing, but we need to get back to the roots of those things. We still need to do the long-term fixes, but we still need to address this crisis. And in a crisis, the work plan items emphasis should be on first on the items that help immediately, and then work on the other stuff as we can, but getting that stuff done first. So, and we're not going to be doing some policy fixes and turning this knob here and this knob there and solve this problem, because this is a what'd you call it? A wicked problem, or as Mike Gleason used to call it, a world-class hard problem that many people have not solved. And so what's clear to me is that the reason this persists is that we have a market failure. It's not just a policy failure, it's a market failure. We don't have middle housing, the missing middle housing, because the market failed to create it. And that, to me, is an appropriate place for government to intervene and take steps to help solve it. My experience tells me that for us to make a difference requires 2 things. We need people and we need money. And so people to work on the fixes, short-term and long-term, but then but without the money, we won't accomplish much. So the money is the foundation of us really making a difference. Changing the policies and the processes will have a limited impact, especially in the short term, but the ability to use the money in the short term, I think, could be profound. And that's, by the way, why I favor a 1% CET. Difference between $3 million and $1.5 million is going to be significant every single year. Over a decade, it's going to be an enormous amount of money. Another issue that, what we were talking about earlier, I'll just hit real quickly, is this lack of renter's perspective in the work we've done so far. The 10% representation on the Housing Task Tools work group versus 50% of our renters really illuminated that for me. So there's not very many renter-specific things in this stuff, which is why I think the Housing Policy Renter Protection Task Team's work, next steps that identify those things, we can stuff them into this recommended action part.
Claire?
Thank you. So yeah, I wanted to thank you for the format of presenting this information to us. It's much closer to what I'd been hoping to receive when I made some critical comments at our first work session. I think it really helps us grapple with all of these complexities in a more informed way. So I just had some thoughts listening to the conversation and, to go to that transportation analogy and kind of using a market-based viewpoint, yes, there are probably a majority of folks in our city who just want to use their car to get around, but there are plenty of people who would like it to be easier to get around without even having to own a car. But the transportation market, quote unquote, isn't able to meet that desire in as robust a way as we might like. So we're always looking for strategies to kind of make that market more friendly. So I think similarly from, our discussion and the information we've received, our housing available choices in that market, which is driven by code, by what lenders are willing to lend for and what builders want to take the risk to build, are not providing housing consumers with the variety of choices we think people want and even need to meet the particular circumstances of their household at whatever time in their lives that they happen to be at. So that's leaving them to choose either less desirable housing, whether that's location or the form of housing, or more expensive housing than they would like to have. And so I think just like we have a role to make our city work by trying to ensure people can get from place to place in a way that works for them, we have responsibility to find ways to support the development of housing choices that meet the needs of residents, to have housing that works for their circumstance, which is, obviously we are seeing that we don't have that variety, and just the market alone is not willing or is not able to meet those consumers where they are at. And so that's, I think, the gap that we're trying to close by looking at these various complicated strategies.
Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you. I think my colleagues have given some excellent input, but I would like to ask about something a little different. We see you guys up here a lot, and we've asked you to do a lot, and I'm a little concerned about your capacity and how your department is dealing with that, because if we're going to ask you to do all these things, we need to make sure you have the resources and the people to do it. So I'm wondering if you could just reflect on how you're feeling right now, and how is it, do you have, you're smiling, so I hope that's probably not a good thing.
Humor helps you get through it. Well, it's a lift. I mean, we're the whole department is there's nobody sitting around looking for something to do. Let's put it that way. And I think what we are trying to do is build a work plan around this that is manageable. I mean, there were 80-some items in the inventory, and there's a lot of items that are code-related, and we were strategic in putting forth the 2 items that we're brought to you today. They align with existing work plan items, and we think they are impactful. So I would say we have our plates full, and we're going to need some time to work through some of these items, and as we build some capacity, we'll be back with additional ones. I don't know if my colleagues want to add to that.
Well, we're always looking for great planners, and they're impacted by the housing crisis as well. I mean, I think we do feel this in our everyday work, and we enjoy working on it. So I think it's actually great. It's, like I said before, bringing together things that have been on our list for a long time, and getting to work with Ann and Stephanie and Michael more intentionally has been productive and mutually beneficial. So the worlds of kind of affordable housing and overall housing and land use for the city as a whole are coming more and more together. And I think that's a good thing. We're recognizing some efficiencies, but also finding places where we need to add additional resources.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at is if you feel like you're not getting what you need to do your jobs, that's our job, to make sure you're getting, to work with John to make sure you're getting what you need. And if it's not there, you need to come back and ask us, because we've been asking a ton of you guys, and we all realize that. So we want that open, I want that open line of communication that you can feel like you can come to us and say, this is just not going to work, and we need to figure out how to make it work with what we have. So appreciate that.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Okay, I have Emily for first cue, 2 people for a second cue, so I'm just wondering if I can have a motion to extend by 10 minutes?
Just to extend 10 minutes.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, thank you. All right, Emily, take it away.
Thank you. This was a daunting document, and I'm going to have to read it a few more times, but I'm very grateful for it. I do think that it's important to have this coalesced, and I appreciate all the explanation columns. The thing I'm most excited about, and I know it's one of the hardest, is aligning the zoning and comprehensive plans. We met before the break, I think, the last break, and discussed that. I understand it now. It took a little bit of effort. But I think that that will be an incredibly helpful tool for us actually being able to build things for the right people in the right places. And that's going to take some time and money. It's a long, complicated process. I remember when I first started asking Denny, this is an awful lot of work. Don't you need some more planners? I'd be happy to take it to budget for you. And he declined, so maybe we should talk again. One of the things that people don't talk about much, except for Betty and I, is the SROs. I really think that there's a need for our unhoused individuals to be able to afford that. And they're only allowed in, I think, R3, R4, and C1, C2. So I'm wondering if there's something we could do to increase where or how we could help that. Another thing I'm interested in is the pre-approved plans for ADUs. I think that if we get this amazing response to ADU construction, that it would save time and money, and also might incorporate some continuity of neighborhood styles. So I encourage that. I also think it's very essential to help people that can't make the jump. So I advocate for the loans both for renters and for potential property owners to prevent foreclosure, for down payments, for security deposits. And I know that means a pile of money to loan, and some of them won't get paid back. But I wonder if someone else could help besides the city, because we have so many demands on our money. I don't know who to ask, but foundations, churches, large companies that maybe, I don't know if you have tax write-off for it, I don't know the financial stuff, but this seems like something that could really help, and it seems something that the private sector could help. And so encourage us to looking into that, and thank you.
All right, I have Mike and Alan for second round.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to push back on something Alan said and combine it with something Emily just said. Really important stuff. I agree with you, though, Alan, about the first part of what you're talking about, the 5 or 6 things we need to get done. I agree with that entirely. But you said that part of why we don't have the result we're looking for is that there was a market failure. And there couldn't be anything more absolutely untrue than that. The market worked perfectly. It worked exactly like markets do. It's the exact same reason there's no ADUs being built in Eugene. They don't pencil. As somebody who loans money to build housing, I can tell you, you can't get the rents required in order to repay the loan to build the things because it's too expensive. That is the market working perfectly, exactly as it should. Until it's less expensive, it won't get the desired result. That's how markets work. And that's the whole point, is that I think we should be doing the things that allow markets to work more effectively. When Springfield entirely diminishes all SDCs for building ADUs, you drop the costs, the market works like it's supposed to, more of them get built. If we were doing more to drop costs, and the biggest costs are the external ones we add to housing and the cost of the land, the market will work exactly as it's supposed to, and we'll get the outcomes we're hoping for. But the reason we're not getting the outcomes is because the market works. If it's too expensive, they don't get built. And if it doesn't pencil, they don't get built. When it comes to information, great job. I thought of a different way to say this. Our goal is to provide housing to all income levels, but what we don't measure or talk about is the implied assumption that it should be for however anyone constructs the number of incomes in a household. We don't talk about 1 income per household versus 2 income per household. When we say we want to build affordable housing for all, we don't say for whom and for what income numbers. Do we build housing that's designed for 2 incomes? Or have we already made the assumption that all housing should be available and affordable to 1 income per house? We're making that assumption already, and I think that's a subject which we should measure and discuss a little more before we act. Thank you.
Alan?
Yeah, my definition of a market failure is its inability to meet the policy outcome. And the policy outcome is a supply of affordable housing. The market may have worked, but it didn't meet the policy outcome, so therefore it failed in terms of what we want to have happen. Markets don't exist just for their own purpose. They exist to come out with a result. And there's little we're actually going to do to, especially in the short term, that will reduce the housing costs. When I asked for information about what the prototypical housing cost is for a new house, and they said it was going to be $407,000. That's a prototypical single-family 2-story wood frame, attached garage, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, 1,800 square foot home. When we asked for the breakdown of what that was, 60% is building and on-site, so building the house. 15% is indirect costs, which is financing. 10% was land, and then 10% was financial return or profit.
It's not.
And then 2% was SDC and other fees like building fees. So where are you going to get that decrease from in any of those categories? I mean, if we just eliminated SDCs, 2% of the housing cost goes away, it doesn't going to make a huge difference. So there's other things that we need to do in order to get there. And that's where I think we need the CET money to be able to create those kind of incentives and programs and loans and grants that we need to be able to do, and people to be able to move those things, especially in the short term. So I agree that this is a really great work, and and I appreciate all this work. And if it helps, this is one of the most important things that's going on in the city, and it probably will have a big impact, so you can take some solace in that. But having said that, I'd like you to take this excellent work that you've done and do one more thing with it, which is to apply a filter in the 2 categories, in progress and recommendations, and have that filter be based on regardless of the subcategories ABC, based on impact. And so a list by high, medium, low, unknown of inside each of these in progress and recommended activities. And some of them you'll have to guess. Some of them are just going to be unknown if you don't know. So I'd like to see that sort by this. And then one other probably nitpicky thing that I think the column that says level of support, I think that's misnamed. I think actually what you're really getting at is the source. It's not, so, the level of support doesn't really, if it comes from the Renters Task Force or BHT or the Housing Task, HTS, that's really about where it came from. You can add the categories of how much the votes were in that group, but I think that's really about the source of the information. But having it rejiggered so that we can see which ones make the biggest difference is really will be an informative tool. I don't think that's that much work, actually, because you already did it.
Chris, one more comment?
Yeah, just quickly. I think it's important to remember that not all barriers to housing are financial or cost. There's a number of barriers that you can throw up to prevent housing if you're careful in how you create those barriers. For example, if you create, and this is the conversation we're having right now about standards and siting and design and so forth and so on. It's what's causing Salem to begin to start looking at legislation. It's the concept about malicious obedience. yes, I realize it's possible, it is allowed to build something in an R1 zone, but I will create so many restrictions and complications and siting and design restrictions that you'll never be able to actually build something. So yeah, there's probably a cost factor involved, but I also maintain there is a code, siting, design, development, code restriction morass that's been created that also creates a significant barrier to building. We passed R1 code amendments in 2014 that I think have created a significant barrier to building accessory dwelling units, but also other kinds of things in neighborhoods. I think that needs to be reviewed, because I think it is creating a significant barrier to being able to build homes. And I think the folks in Salem have begun to notice that communities throughout Oregon have utilized this code mechanism in order to create hidden barriers or restrictive barriers that prevent people from being able to build, even if it's allowed, but I'll make it so hard that you can't do it. And so, yeah, cost is a factor, but there's also other factors beyond cost that can restrict our ability to build additional housing. And I think those are also things we need to take a look at.
Thank you all. I just want to end on one sort of upbeat note here, having ended on such a downer. I went yesterday to Peter Keyes at the University of Oregon, has a series of architecture students that are working on missing middle design projects, and so they had a exhibition yesterday of their designs. And a couple of very interesting things. First is that one of the follow-ups, to follow up on some of the things Mike has said, and you all may know this, their next iteration is to look at the census data with a finer filter so they could really identify more of those specifics about household type and size, so that we would actually then, 6 months from now, have the benefit of that research, of sort of that finer look. What kinds of households are we really looking at? And the other thing is that with their, I don't know how many designs, we're at maybe 30 different designs, they had picked actual lots in Eugene. So there's one on River Road, there's one in Whitaker, and there's one, and I guess there was in Friendly. There were about nine lots. But they did pro formas on that, and so they teased out, and they're going to do some fine tuning on that too, to identify, square footage, how many people could occupy housing, the type of housing. Actually, very interesting. So they're continuing to kind of refine that information. So that's another piece of information that can come to council also that I think we'll find quite useful. So thank you all for really, really wonderful work, very informative, and happy spring break.